Hello everyone, this is KansaiDorito, and this is the 10th episode of Girls Frontline 2 Explained, where we talk about the girls, their skills, and some of their backgrounds to get you caught up. Today, we're going to talk about Littara, aka WKP, aka this random dude named Sabitsuki on Steam apparently. Littara is a returning character from Girls Frontline 1, and is very introverted, so much so that Griffin and Kruger fired her and left her for dead. But back then, she wielded a flare gun, the Wolfer Kampfpistol. Unfortunately, it wasn't like the TF2 flare gun, so she seriously struggled on her own. That is, until she met Ulrid. In her time with Ulrid and the rest of the Doll Society, she started carrying around pen and paper to effectively communicate with her newfound allies, and picked up a new weapon, and imprinted on it. Personality-wise, she's meticulous, thorough, and very caring, giving her a more strategic role on her teams, just like in her flare gun days. But with her newly increased firepower, she's much more capable in combat. Her weapon of choice is the Galil ARM. That's not an ARM. The ARM looks like this, and is indeed a machine gun. What she seems to be holding, though, is a Galatz, a semi-auto marksman rifle based on the ARM. But she fires it fully automatically. Okay, look, there's already a Galil, and while I have no basis for this claim, I feel like we're gonna get her eventually. So let's just roll the clock back really, really far and talk about flares. In the year 960, the Song Dynasty ruled China, and under their rule, China would flourish. Technology, science, philosophy, engineering, and mathematics would advance greatly. Most importantly, would give us the first surviving records of the chemical formula for gunpowder. For as long as gunpowder has existed, it brought with it war and destruction. With gunpowder came various weapons, like fire arrows, bombs, cannons, and even flamethrowers, and the Song Dynasty would abuse their technological advantage, establishing overpowered defensive tactics, holding off many attacks from foreign invaders. But during a very important Mongolian invasion that we can't get into right now, they would develop a signal bomb, which was a lightweight, soft-shelled, timed explosive they would launch into the air to send messages to troops far away or signal distress. Flares would change very little over the centuries, with the first proper flare gun being patented in 1859 by one Edward Wilson Very, who invented the iconic Very flare gun, with the classic single-shot, breech-action, snub-nosed pistol design we all know and love. He developed it during his time in the US Navy, but its popularity would truly rise during the Russo-Japanese War, where it more so played the role of a torch, being used at night to light up the battlefield. During the Great War, however, the flare would become a quintessential tool, and for the Germans, none would be more popular than Walther's Leuchtpistole, model 1894, a solid first attempt at a military flare gun. But as we all know, the Central Powers would lose, and the Treaty of Versailles would force them to demilitarize and get rid of a lot of their small arms, and even their flare guns weren't safe from these restrictions. So when a certain mustached man would rise to power, the new Germany would need another flare gun. In 1939, Walther would deliver, and they would deliver basically the same thing. The Wolfer Kampfpistole, or WKP, whose only real difference between the previous Leuchtpistole is a rifled barrel, and the Germans would use this improved design throughout the Second World War for a variety of things, like signaling, marking targets, the before-mentioned illumination, and a couple of new things. With the creation of smoke shells, they were used to create smoke cover, allowing for concealed troop movements or to cover a window on Mirage so your dipshit teammate stops peeking it. However, my favorite thing they do with them is give them explosive shells, giving German troops a small lightweight grenade launcher. I wish I could show you what that looks like, but I never found any footage. The Kampfpistole would see the Germans through the Second World War, and with their second defeat, the WKP would fall into obscurity. Today, Kampfpistoles are rarely found outside of museums or private collections, so like Littara, the world has moved on. Speaking of moving on, let's move on to Littara and her skills, cons, and upgrades. Wait, actually, before we get into this too deep, we need to talk about Littara's role. She is first and foremost an AoE support and does exceptionally well in this role, and not much else. In her niche, she is unmatched and extremely effective, even without a proper build, and I am 99% sure Mika knew this and specifically toned down her raw numbers to keep her this way, lest she overshadow AoE DPS units. So if you're like me and wince at poorly scaled attacks, understand that the damage is an afterthought, because even if Littara deals 1 damage with her attacks, she still brings a fuck ton of support to your other units. Alright, That being said, her passive, Systematic Breakdown, brings one thing and one thing only: weak ass damage, dealing a fucking sorry ass 30% of her attack and one stability damage to the nearest enemy with a defense debuff within her above average range of 8. And gives her a confectance point. Now, obviously, 30% of her attack is a joke, and her cons don't make the damage much better. Her C3 adds 20% of her attack to her attack scaling, which on paper is almost double, but in reality makes it only slightly more noticeable. Her C6 lets it hit twice, giving her another point of confectance, literally doubling her confectance gain, which is really good. Now, I know, the damage is weak, but without nodes, this is her only source of confectance gain, so making sure you get it off every round is important, especially if she's below C5, which we'll get into in a bit. Her basic is Quick Riding, and is the most basic attack of the basics, dealing 80% of her attack and 2 stability damage to a single enemy within her base range. 8. Like most AoE characters, this is her best source of AoE damage, and is her second strongest scaling attack, but with no utility, this is really a last resort, or finisher, and should almost never be your first option. None of her cons affect it, so let's move on to her first skill, Perfect Opportunity, an 8-range 2-tile AoE that deals 70% of her attack as physical damage, 2 points of stability, and applies Vulnerable 1, a 10% universal vulnerability to everyone she hits for 2 turns on a 2-turn cooldown. Now, 10% Vuln for no confectance cost on an AoE with 1 turn of downtime is honestly better than it sounds, and is made even better when you stack it with her other debuffs, letting you seriously Swiss cheese a group of enemies with your teams. Speaking of stacking debuffs, her second skill is Reliable Cover, a 3x8 AoE she can spray off in the cardinal directions that deals 65% of her attack, applies defense down 2 for 2 turns, destroys cover outside of the first row, and reduces its own cooldown by 1 for each enemy it hits. Which, wow. Before cons, it doesn't hit enemies in the first 2 rows, but her C2 gives you the full 3x8, giving 24 potential tiles of damage, which is the second biggest AoE currently in the game, letting Littara coat the battlefield and defense down, blow up a buttload of cover, and if you hit enough enemies, do it again next turn. Now, her skills are obviously her supportive abilities, and you should absolutely be using them as such, applying Vulns and defense shred to large clumps of enemies so your allies can clean it up. However, her ult helps her clean up if there's no one around. Strategist's Plan is another 2-tile AoE that deals 85% of her attack as physical damage and 2 stability damage for 4 confectance points. This is her best scaling skill in terms of raw damage at a base level, and if you hit someone with a defense debuff, the scale increases by 10% and doubles the stability damage. Her C4 increases the damage to defense-shredded enemies by another 20%, and her C5 cuts the confectance cost in half, bringing the cost down to 2, which is honestly way better than it sounds. Always having her highest damage skill on tap and being able to spam them to kill weaker enemies without sacrificing a cooldown is really nice. And in combination with her C6 upgraded passive, will let you ult for 100% free as long as you keep enemies defense shredded around her, which, due to her great range and easy to lower cooldowns, is super easy. Now, something I want to stress before we move on to her nodes is how absolutely perfectly her kit synergizes with Peritia. All of her skills, including her passive, will allow Peritia to follow up with her action supports, allowing Peritia to not only benefit from the defense shred and vulnerabilities, but also gain lots of confectance to ult very often. Because of Peritia's role as the premier AoE DPS and Littara's role as the premier AoE debuffer, I cannot recommend pairing these two enough. Alright, now onto her nodes, and if I'm being honest, none of them are bad. They all have their place and all bring something you'd probably want if you could pick all of them. That being said, it's up to you to decide what you want out of her, and to weigh which ones you'll benefit the most from, especially the first 2. Strategic Planning gives her 3 confectance points to start with, letting her ult right away if she doesn't have C5, which may or may not be very important to you. If you do have C5, this becomes less necessary since you can already ult right away. But if all you want her for is support bombing, this node will help you do just that. Just remember, her bombs do significantly less damage at higher cons if the enemies aren't defense shredded, so again, be mindful of that and how it affects how you play her. Her second node, Getting Experience, also gives her confectance points, giving her 1 point for every 3 instances of damage she deals. This node is absolutely essential at lower dupes, since her base 4 cost ultimate with her standard 1 confectance per turn is unsustainable, and is going to lead to a lot of downtime. At C5, you can still argue this is a necessary note to have. 2-cost ults are nice, but with her base confectance generation, it's also unsustainable. Meaning there will be times you just don't have her ult available when you need it, which massively affects her performance. If you have max dupes, this is still nice to have. Getting your double passive off is not a guarantee, and having the safety net to keep you above that 2-point threshold can be a nice way to ease off some of the stress of having to be perfect to get the most out of her. That ease of mind alone, for me, makes it worth running, but if you're an MLG Dorito snorting Mountain Dew injecting gamer, this isn't necessary. Press the advantage lets her apply a random 2-turn debuff if she exploits a phase weakness, which requires enemies to be weak to heavy ammo, since she does not deal elemental damage aside from a node we'll get to later. That being said, heavy ammo weakness is honestly pretty common, but still, only being able to sometimes get a random debuff off isn't worth it unless you really know what you're up against. Identifying gaps increases crit rate by 15% against enemies with defense debuffs, helping increase the damage of your ult bombs even further if you use them right. With Littara's seriously easy time applying defense debuffs, it helps add a better chance to increase your damage when applying your second round of debuffs, which is your usual MO when playing Littara. Battle Analysis applies attack down 1, a 10% attack debuff to any enemy she hits with perfect opportunity for 2 turns, giving her skill a bit more utility, especially against elites since they usually won't die to an AoE combo. Aggressive Attack is loopy, turning reliable cover into burn damage if she didn't move before using it, which gives her a bit more synergy with burn teams and lets her exploit phase weakness to activate Press the Advantage more frequently, if that's something you're going for. Her Capstone Vulnerability Exploit is nice. A 3% crit rate increase and 7% increased damage against enemies with a defense debuff is nice, and Littara can definitely use it, but honestly, I just put it on my defense down QJ since she gets her defense down before she attacks. That being said, it's great on both and is super worth getting. For her weapons, we've got 4, and all of them are great, probably because there are literally only 2 MG characters in the game, and spoilers, there's been no MG units added even on the CN version of the game, which is a year ahead of the global patch. On that depressing note, let's start with a trait, which all MGs currently share, applying 1 random debuff to any enemy hit with AoE damage, which is really good, but since every MG currently has it, we're not going to discuss it any further. Now, onto the SRs, starting with her drum-magged semi-auto marksman rifle, the Galil Galatz, or as it's called in-game, the Model ARM. It has a slightly higher base attack when compared to the other SR, and its effect increases damage by 5 to 15% if she has more than 3 tiles of movement remaining when she acts. If the enemy has a defense debuff, she gets another 5% damage increase, which like I mentioned before is simple enough to apply but will usually only affect your second turn onwards. That being said, the biggest increase by this effect requires you to move less than 2 tiles to get its benefit, because of her base movement of 5, and because calibrations have absolutely no effect on this number, there's no way around it either, so you're going to have to seriously plan out where you want her. Way ahead of time, which honestly isn't as bad as it sounds, and with an 8-tile range, getting her to the center of most maps is going to let her cover a good chunk. But with how many turns it'll take you to get there, sometimes the encounter will be over before you even gain any benefit. The Pachang SP gives you a significantly more applicable effect, at the cost of a bit of base attack. Its effect increasing the damage of the next skill by 10 to 20% if Littara hits 4 to 1 targets, which, at max calibrations, is seriously just guaranteed, giving Littara a 20% skill damage buff on every turn after her first. This easy-to-maintain effect makes it her best option by a good margin, but only really at those higher calibration levels since hitting 4 enemies every turn is a seriously steep price to pay. The SSRs are very interesting, so let's start with the Battle Pass option, the Mjolnir, with the lower base attack of the 2 SSRs but a 15% attack buff to compensate. The Mjolnir's effect takes what the ARM does and turns it up to 11, giving a 15 to 30% damage increase and restoring 10 to 20% of max HP and 1 to 3 stability points at the cost of not moving at all. Now, turning your Littara into a sentry gun is really funny, but like I mentioned before, it can take several rounds to get her to a position where she can properly benefit from not moving, and sometimes an encounter will end just before she gets there. But in this case, not even having the luxury of slight repositions and inching the last couple of turns. With that in mind though, the raw attack increase and the higher base damage sets it above the SR options, and with 8 range, Littara can definitely make good use of it, even outside of ideal positions. Optical Illusion has the highest attack of all the MGs, and a 25% crit rate increase to boost, already putting it above Mjolnir, but also includes a new addition to the trait. Like all other MGs, it applies a 1-turn random debuff upon dealing AoE damage. But in addition, it makes your attacks ignore 15% of an enemy's cover damage reduction if they suffer from 3 or more debuffs. Its effect increases the next active skill's damage by 10 to 20% if you hit 3 to 2 targets. If it's an AoE skill, it increases by another 10 to 20%, giving you a massively upgraded Pachang at higher calibrations and giving your Littara an extremely noticeable damage increase. But it doesn't end there. It also has a 20 to 100% chance to apply 1 to 2 random debuffs for 1 turn, giving you more debuffs to apply and making it absolutely feasible to get that cover damage reduction ignoring on your first turn, becoming more and more consistent at higher calibrations. That being said, Littara's job isn't one of heavy damage dealer, and her most important debuffs are the ones she applies with her base kit, so going down this path is completely unnecessary. Littara will absolutely pull her weight and more without it, so at a base level I wouldn't recommend going out of your way to get it. That is, unless she's your favorite, in which case give this Christmas tree your fucking golden machine gun and turn absolutely everything into red mist. As for attachments, take Phase Strike, unless you're farming specifically for her, in which case physical boost is technically her best. You can honestly do whatever you want with her stats. Like I mentioned before, she applies her debuffs even if she deals 1 damage. So if you don't want to focus on that, or just can't be fucked to farm attachments for her, she'll take those HP and defense stats no problem. If you really want to build her optimally though, she takes attack percent, crit rate, crit damage, and if she's carrying the Optical Illusion, make sure you get crit damage on that barrel so she can really lay it down hard. Now that you've learned everything about Littara, you've earned your PhD in Litterature. As always, thank you for watching, and I wanted to seriously apologize for this video's tardiness. I got hit with a bout of sickness that left me sounding like garbage and wanting to lay in bed for a couple days, so I just, did that. With that said though, everything's back to normal and everything's going to be continuing as normal moving forward. If I got something wrong, pronounced something wrong, or you just want to talk about the star on Littara's head, please leave a comment. I'm still reading and enjoying every last comment you guys write, and I want to thank you again for being the absolute best. Especially my amazing returning viewers who have quickly amassed an absolutely staggering 900-member Discord server. I absolutely adore you guys and everything you guys post. All of the funny, interesting, and/or informational stuff I see makes me wish I could just spend all day swiping through it. Thank you. And speaking of thanking you, I wanted to thank the incredible donators who helped me become a millionaire in Paraguayan Guarani. Max Euphemism, Full Auto Alchemist, Jackal, Dylan Dupir, Jadiz, and Omega. Your guys' support means the actual world to me, and I can't honestly thank you enough. I made a new goal, to be a millionaire in Cambodian Real, which got absolutely destroyed in one singular day. My personal gratitude to D's Nuts and Kira Kuriyami, who double-teamed my biggest goal yet. My current goal is to become a millionaire in Malagasy Ariary, or like $200, so if you want to support me, the link to my Ko-fi is in the description. Otherwise, you can always leave a super thanks or a channel membership, both of which have their own perks and their own spotlight in my Discord server, if that's something you're interested in. Alright, now for the moment you've all been waiting for. Who's next? And this time, it's the canon wife, Groza, and her OTS-14 Groza. After her, it's a toss-up between Ulrid, Nemesis, and Tololo, who aren't exactly tied, but are very close. Remember to leave your votes in the comments. Alright, I'll get out of your hair now. Just wanted to thank you one last time, and I hope you stay strapped. Oh, just gun it, just gun it, just gun it!
Just leg it! Fuck that shit!
I'm fucking
Throw the pipe bomb, throw the pipe bomb! Yeet.
Yo, wait for me, boys, I'm fucking slow up the house.
The room.
Fucking help me!
Nope, sorry. Oh.
I'm gonna
Stop!
Run! Not shooting you, dumbass!
Kansai, SWAT! I was gonna say SWAT
I'm
here.
at the fucking door! I'm at the fucking door!
Oh! Help!
You, I got you! I have a deagle! It's a fucking charger, dude! I'm not gonna kill it in a second!
You fell into the safe room! He died as he fell at the moment.
Stop closing the door! Leave him for dead, leave him for dead!
Do they have also the they copy like your
Fuck that spider up. You got your shovel?
No, I say. No, I don't. Oh, it's a slime! God! Oh my god,
In the year 1960, I said 1960. Yeah, in the year 1960, the Song Dynasty ruled China. What a fucking dipshit.